Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. Good morning, John. Good morning, Anne. It is so great to have you both here. I say here, we're, virtually here, but both here in our virtual studio this morning. How are you both doing?
Great. Good morning.
Doing good. This is the summit episode after a fall summit and then a medium summit. And now actual summit with a great vista because we got Anne with us to end strong.
Hi.
This is our end of kind of season 2 here.
Wow.
And we thought this was happening a couple weeks ago and then we messed up and had an extra episode last week. So we are thrilled though that you were joining us at the summit of season 2. So welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to doing a formal introduction of you here in just a minute. But before that, for our listeners, our weekly reminder to download and share this podcast if it befits you and if you're enjoying it. We certainly appreciate your engagement in our comment section, finding us on LinkedIn. And so if you have questions, ideas, thoughts, we are going to be taking a couple of weeks quote unquote off. We're going to try to share some of our past episodes as a refresh, some of our favorites from seasons 1 and 2. But that also means that if you have thoughts, ideas, questions, concepts you would like to hear more about, have us discuss, even debate in season 3, send us some ideas. We're going to be kicking off season 3 at the end, I believe, John, somewhere around the end of July. So we have about a month here for your ideas to come through, and we're still kind of creating our map of the next season. So we'd love to get those from each of you.
So far, we've got debates on servant leadership coming up. Josh and I were exchanging texts on how our different ways of ordering the world make us think very differently about the same thing. So you know what? Come back, folks. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
A lot more intensity, right, Josh? More arguing, more fighting, more like Crossfire from the old CNN days. Is that what we're going?
Hannity and Colmes of leadership.
Hannity and Colmes. We good.
Yeah.
We good.
Well, good. Well, enough about us today. We're really excited to introduce our guest today. And so I'm going to go ahead and kind of share the official intro about Anne, and then we're going to jump into some really fascinating questions and topics today. We're really excited because we're going to go into some places that John and I have not yet. So I hope that you all enjoy, and I know you will, our conversation with Anne this morning. So today's guest is Anne McGhee-Stinson, an executive leadership coach, consultant, and managing partner at InteraWorks. For more than 30 years, Anne has helped leaders and organizations navigate complexity, build trust, and create cultures where people and performance can thrive together. She's worked with organizations like Microsoft, Dell, Honeywell, Deloitte, and Lockheed Martin, and has helped develop hundreds of thousands of leaders around the world. Along the way, she's lived and worked across Europe and Asia, built a multi-million-dollar business, and developed a unique perspective on what drives sustainable leadership and organizational success. Anne is also an author, a playwright, very cool, and documentary producer, also very cool, whose work explores wisdom, resilience, and human potential. We'll be sure to link all of the great resources related to Anne and her work in our show notes. So without further ado, Anne, a big welcome to Leadership Limbo. It's great to have you here. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the intro. And it's interesting that this is the summit because our mission at InteraWorks is elevating the human experience.
Nice.
So very appropriate.
We love that.
Yeah.
Outside of those that bio, anything about you that's important for folks to know? Anything about what your passions are, your fun, or you can just talk about what it's like to be a playwright, because I think that's my dream life at some point.
Well, I live in the mountains of Colorado. Also, a connection. Yep. There you go.
Not the mountains. We live on the Front Range, but nevertheless, close enough.
Yeah, it's close enough, as a playwright, at one time I was running the community theater in my small town, and they were running out of money, and so we didn't have enough money to buy the rights to produce a play. So I decided, I had this title in my head that had been floating around for some time, and it was called The Wisdom Within These Walls. And so what I decided to do was to go out and interview senior citizens in our community and do oral histories, and captured those oral histories from, senior citizens that were at the senior center and people that I was introduced to, and so on and so forth. And then took those oral histories and composed them down to short little vignettes that conveyed wisdom. And wow, I mean, I learned so much. I mean, because when you're, 70, 80, 90 years old, looking back, your life story has, deep meaning. And then I was able to take those little vignettes and we produced them into plays, and we produced them all along the Front Range. That you're well familiar with. We did it in Parker, and we did it in Lone Tree, and we did it in Castle Rock,
Amazing.
And it was an extraordinary experience. And I think one of the most beautiful things about it is that when we produced those plays, the people who had given us their oral histories were in the audience.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so after
Oh,
the
cool.
lights came up, we had those people stand in the audience, and you could just hear a gasp like,
Oh, that's so cool.
I never knew that that person sitting next to me lived that story. It was
That's so
really
cool.
cool.
And then did that turn into a book for you? You took their stories and turned it into a book? Because I know there was a book by the same name that you've
That's
written,
right.
or is it the play? Or is it the play itself?
No, it's I took those stories and compiled more. So I had stories from senior citizens who
Cool.
participated in the space race, and I had stories. Then I went and gathered stories from veterans because I have a particular interest in veterans stories. I had veteran stories going back to World War II, and some of those veterans are still with us. God bless them.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Um, well, it's called The Wisdom Within These Walls, so we'll
Mhm.
link that, but would encourage people to check that out as well. I
Thank you,
mean,
John.
speaking of stories and, incredible backstories and backgrounds, your own leadership has been unconventional. Germany during the Cold War, Okinawa, adult education, military transition work, entrepreneurship, and now you're in leadership development. How has that shaped the way you see leadership differently from more traditional leadership thinkers?
Yeah, a strange path for sure. So let me set a little tiny context. I went to southern Germany as a 19-year-old on a summer vacation.
Oh,
That's how I got there. I wasn't associated with the military. I don't think I'd ever seen someone in uniform before, but I was in Germany and I decided I wanted to stay there. And so at that time, Germany was divided. East Germany and West Germany, East Berlin, West Berlin. It
mhm.
was the Cold War. At that time, there were over 1 million American service members who were stationed throughout Europe. And there were universities there who were there to offer adult education programs to our active duty military so they could take, classes when they were off duty. And so as a 19-year-old, now you can imagine I didn't have, a lot of education. I didn't have a lot of credentials. I didn't have a lot of degrees. And so I was able to go to work for one of the universities as an executive admin
Mm,
for one of the deans of the university. And he was the dean of military programs, offering these programs to the military people. And he was retired military, as were most of the instructors and most of the staff of the university were retired military. So I got lucky because
mm,
the man that I worked for, Jim Curtio, took me under his wing, and he treated me like a family member.
mm.
He was there with his family, his wife and daughters and so on. I became another daughter to him, and he really just took me under his wing, and he looked after me, and he trained me. He trained me in leadership, and it wasn't that he specifically taught me, he showed me. He showed me what leadership was.
Mm.
And he demonstrated it every single day, day in and day out. And our team at that university produced extraordinary results. And I think it was partially, it was a lot because of the leadership that Jim demonstrated. But really what I learned there about leadership, the military never trained for predictability. The military didn't train for stability. The military didn't train for replicatable results.
Mhm.
They trained for chaos. They
Yeah.
trained for complexity. They trained for, for anything other than what was planned. That's how they trained. And so when complexity or chaos or uncertainty or anything other than predictability showed up, it 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 was normal. It wasn't,
Didn't phase
it
them. Yeah.
wasn't something that threw everybody off track. It was like, okay, let's pull together. So what I learned was, um, through that experience, clarity of mission, commitment to something larger than yourself. Because again, this was a divided Germany, and it was a dangerous place to be for Americans at that time. I don't know if many of your listeners will remember, but there was a lot of terrorist activity in Europe at that time against
Yeah.
Americans. Yeah.
Hmm.
So there was the Baader-Meinhof gang. There were bombings in the nightclubs in Berlin. There was the Red Army Brigade. There was a lot of terrorist activity. And I was a civilian. I was not married. I lived in a little apartment in a small village, and driving into work in the morning, driving onto the military installations, I would have to pass a bomb check test. So they would search my car for
Um,
bombs
yeah.
every morning. So that was
Yeah.
the environment. Now we talk about that um, because um, it didn't, the work that we did when I talked about clarity of mission and commitment to something larger than ourselves, it didn't eliminate the danger that was there, right? There was real danger. There was real tension. There was a reason that there were a million Americans in Europe in during the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
And so it didn't ignore that, and it didn't eliminate that. In fact, it made our mission and our camaraderie and our team strength even stronger. So those are
Yeah.
some of the things that I learned there.
Well, and it seems that fits in really well with the idea that we train for complexity, we train for chaos. We often talk about on this show that leadership exists because there's ambiguity, because there's
Mm,
uncertainty, because there's complexity. Those are the moments you most need it. I
mhm.
think just one question from that popped for me. You talked about Jim, and can you tell us like what was it about his leadership at that time that stood apart from you from what you saw from other leaders, and like that still stands apart like in terms of
Oh,
how you think about
huge.
leadership? I'm sure there's many, but like one big
Yeah.
thing about it.
Well, I'll tell you one quick story.
Okay.
So, our team created really great results, and our region grew. And because our region grew, we had to split the region. And so they brought in another leader to handle the new region. And because I was Jim's executive admin, I was on both teams, the transition teams. And this new leader came in, and you looked at that guy and you went, wow, that is leadership embodied, um, because he looked the part.
Yeah.
But it took a couple of weeks before he got into that position, and he started to sort of, I don't want to say abuse the team, but he ignored the team. He ignored our protocols. He ignored, check-ins. He was on the phone all the time to his stockbroker back in Chicago from Germany. Anyway, he was not a great leader. And news of this began to kind of filter back to the leadership of the university. And eventually somebody came down and they fired him. The next day, he was sitting in Jim's office crying. Like he was he was really devastated. He did not see that coming. We all saw it coming,
Yeah.
but he was crying. And I remember he looked at Jim, my boss, and he said, Jim, what would you do if you were in my position? And Jim looked right back at him, and you could see his wheels turning, and you could see he was really trying so hard to answer this question. But finally, he just looked at him and he said, I would never be in your position.
Oof, okay.
Right? You could just feel
Yeah.
that. And it was what I understood in that moment is like every decision that we make as leaders, every action that we take as leaders, it creates a trajectory,
Mm,
right? And Jim understood, and he gave him an honest answer, but he never would have made the same decisions that person made. He would never have been in that position. And so what dropped in at that moment is every decision you make, every action you take defines who you are as a leader.
mm, really good. So, Anne, I'm going to move to kind of building on that. And this is based on, for our listeners, this is based on a pre-conversation we had. So before we hop on our podcast with guests, we always like to talk to them first. And in that initial conversation, you brought up this idea of we're in an in-between time, which fits nicely with the idea of
Mm,
limbo and liminality. But we're at an in-between time for leadership where a lot of good leadership material still exists, but doesn't seem to be working the same way anymore.
mhm.
What do you think has changed?
Wow, everything, right? And so I love the premise of your podcast because it's accurate. Um, m things were changing for quite some time, you know, um, globalization, etcetera. That's nothing new, but, when we hit the pandemic, we were talking about change. We're talking about transformation. So, change, you can go back, right? You change your jacket, you can put another jacket on, but transformation, there's no going back. And
Yeah.
that's what happened during the pandemic, I believe.
Mm,
So again, I wanna slow down a minute here and set some context. Um, During the pandemic, I wrote an article and I called it "Time Out." And in that article, I posed the question, because everybody was asking, about returning to business as usual. When do we get back to
mm,
business as usual? And at that
mhm.
time, and this was in probably May 2020, I'm going to say, I asked a different question. I said, what if we don't return to business as usual? Would that be so bad? Because at that time, we were already seeing statistics of disengagement and
Yeah.
anxiety and stress. So it's like, why would you want to go back to that? During the pandemic, people had a moment. It was a time, it was like a cosmic time out. Let's
Hmm.
think about what's important to us. Let's think about how do we want to work? How do we want to contribute? And how do we want to create meaning, right? So people really slowed down for a minute and really thought about some, I would say, existential questions. And then, you know what? We returned to work and we tried to get back to business as usual, business as normal. There's no going back. And I believe we're sort of in a whiplash right now
Mm,
because before you can transform, right, you have to, first of all, you have to recover. So a lot of businesses are still in recovery from the
yeah.
pandemic.
Right.
Then you have to stabilize. And then you have to create some degree of I'm going to call it coherence, where things are moving and operating in a fundamentally different way, given a different environment. It's a whole different environment out here. And then transformation. How do we do business in 2026 going forward when everything has changed? Hybrid work, that's not going to go away. Globalization and the interconnectedness of our supply chain, and that's not going to go away. IT and AI and the adoption of technologies during the pandemic skyrocketed. It had
right.
to. That's not going away. So I think talking about change is minimizing what we're going through. We are going through a fundamental paradigm shift of leadership. And I know you guys know that because that's what your podcast is
Yeah.
addressing. We're in between
Mm-hmm.
everything that we knew and a new form of leadership. And there's never been a time like this. No one has faced what we're facing, and there are no textbooks to tell us what to do next.
Well, okay, that leads into what is popping in my head is it's hard to predict what that means, right? But so as we think about this change and how we handle it, what is it? Is it about thinking about the behaviors of folks in the workforce and how it's changed? Is it actually about the structure of organizations? Is it, Josh and I talk a lot about, I guess, hierarchy and how that fits in. Like, what
Mm,
in your
mm,
mind, knowing you can't predict the future, are you thinking, man,
mm.
this is the thing that organizations, if they could pick one thing to really hone in on when it comes to this change, what is that?
There's not one thing.
Yeah.
I wish I, but again,
Yeah.
I would be setting us up, I think, for um, short-sighted,
Mhm.
ness. I think everything. So you mentioned it. Many of our organizations were built on I'm going to say Newtonian model.
Mhm.
The model Isaac Newton. The Newtonian model was the basis for most of our organizational design for centuries. And what the Newtonian model created was an assembly line, sort of, predictable, stable. You do the same thing each and every time, and the output is the same result each and every time. It's predictable. And that's based on the science of Isaac Newton. So we created organizations that are top-down command and control organizations that are based on the Newtonian model.
Yeah.
Our school system, and I know you guys come, from our educational system, so you can attest to this, is based on that same model. Is like if we do the same things, the output is going to be predictable.
Mhm.
Our medical model is based on that. If we do this, this is the outcome. If we do this, this is the outcome. That whole model in business, right? That whole model, I don't want to say is inaccurate because it's not. It's valid. It's just incomplete
Mm-hmm.
in an environment that is so interconnected and so interdependent and so complex. That model alone is no longer adequate.
Is it too much about like cause and effect when actually the effect could be varied depending on every circumstance and every person?
Yes, exactly. So the Newtonian model is cause and effect.
Mm.
Um, the my question is that's all about performance too, because in that model, it was cause and effect, and then you produce a result, which we called performance, and performance is the output,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think we ought to be asking literally, it's a paradigm change, not how to increase performance, but how to create coherence in our systems, including our human systems, our organizational systems, our educational systems, our medical systems. How do we create coherence in an environment that has changed forever?
Yeah.
Mm.
And I want to explain coherence because I knew I threw that word out there. So, the HeartMath Institute, which is a research institute that has researched coherence for decades, defines individual coherence, and it is a physiological state for a human being. It's a state in which all your entire central nervous system is uh, is in sync, and it's working in sync. So your heart, your central nervous system, your brain, the neurology of your brain, the neuroscience of your brain, all of that is in sync. And when we are in coherence, and this is important for people to understand, coherence is a physiological state. It can be measured.
Mm.
It can be replicated. It can be produced at will for people who are trained to do it, and it's not hard. And so it's a measurable physiological state.
How do you measure it?
Through HRV, heart rate
Okay.
variability. And
Got it.
when heart rate variability, it's based on the idea that your heart, this is not an idea, this is science. Your heart has neurons just like your brain. And the heart neurons have an intelligence of their own. So they experience differently than the neurons in your brain. And this
Okay.
makes perfect sense because if you think about, our development as human beings, if we were out hunting and gathering and we heard a rustle in the bushes, your heart would be the first thing to react, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
so if you needed to run, your heart would accelerate and it would become irregular, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the science that this is based on. But the other side of that is that when you're in a state of coherence, the heart is in a very rhythmic state. And here's what's interesting. The heart sends more information to the brain than the other way around. So 90% of all of the communication between our heart and our brain is from the heart to the brain.
Oh.
So when the heart, 90%. When the heart is in a coherent state, it sends a signal to the brain and it tells the brain, chill, right? Everything's okay, you're safe. And when that happens, that state of coherence, human beings get access to their higher cognitive thinking, their higher brain, literally. It's measurable. You can see it through our medical technology. So that is a state of coherence in an individual.
Yeah.
But what I'm interested in then is, as above, so below. How does that track to teams and then organizations? And what might team coherence and organizational coherence look like? Because I don't believe we're seeing it now.
Yeah. Do you want to answer that question? That I think you asked it rhetorically, but I'm actually really curious. I know
Yeah.
we're talking about the neuroscience side of leadership here, and I think it's fascinating to think about coherence as a physiological concept because there's something in my own experience going through life, I would say not just work, but especially it's visible at work of incoherence, right? Like, so I think sometimes like I know there's a rational problem with what I'm seeing between, is this part of our process talking to this part of our process? Is this role and responsibility clear enough to, you know, determine what we need to do in these types of circumstances? Like there's that side of coherence, but there's
Hmm.
also this like really visceral sense of incoherence that really bothers me.
Hmm.
And I would even say on some level, you know, a little self reveal, but I've hit what I imagine to be probably, hopefully, the halfway point of my life, and have spent the last few years in what I would call a state of internal incoherence, of like
Hmm.
shifting and thinking about what am I doing? Where am I going next? And so I guess
Hmm.
I'm saying all of
Hmm.
this and to bring
Hmm.
up that coherence is often talked about in a very literal sort of way when it comes to organizational design. But what you're
Hmm.
speaking to here is a sense of incoherence or coherence that's almost visceral, that's physiological, and I had never thought of it that way. So I'm
Hmm.
curious to your question, like what's the upshot for leadership when it
Oh,
comes to coherence? Like what does this mean for leadership? Mm.
that's so great. Well, let's start with the individual, right? Because that sensation that you or anyone has that, something is incoherent, it's off. Pay
Mhm.
attention because
Yeah.
that's your heart intelligence. And there, we have the language of the heart is everywhere, right? So heartbroken and heart-led,
Right,
that's
right.
no mistake. That is our intuitive knowing that our heart intelligence is a powerful, powerful energy. It's in a powerful tool. So if
And
you're feeling, go
not to
ahead.
interrupt you there, but it's just I want to build off what you said there. The number of times that I'm like coaching someone and we're talking about like, hey, I've got this problem, and I ask them, well, what do you notice when this problem is occurring and you want to shift the behavior? They're like, well, my heart rate goes crazy. I'm like, oh, and so they use that as and it's amazing that number of times that becomes an aha for people. Like, oh, that's my
Mhm,
trigger moment. That's how I
mhm,
think about the behavior differently. So I
mhm.
think a lot of us recognize or know that, but we don't recognize it. So
Yep.
anyway, I just wanted to add, I think there's a lot of people who use that as a way of shifting behaviors. Then when they realize that seems off as well.
Oh, so great. So that's the heart intelligence. And just
Mm,
to add a little bit for your listeners here, it's a physiological state in a human being. It's
Yeah.
measurable, it's replicatable. Okay. And this technology, because it is a technology, it's human technology, but
mm,
this technology is being used and taught in elite teams. So, Navy SEALs, elite athlete teams are using this very technology to activate the intelligence of the heart so that we gain access to the full capacity of our brains and use it, especially when things are tough or when we're under stress, whether that's physically, emotionally, etc. That heart intelligence can vastly change things. And in fact,
mm.
we're currently doing a leadership development program for Metro Nashville Police Department because we see a need for policing in particular to have some tools to work, in environments that are constantly high pressure,
Mm.
and be able to recalibrate and regulate, after uh, an incident.
Yeah.
So, and it's having great effect. All right. So if we know that that's individual, um, it's a component of individual coherence. It's not a big stretch, I don't think, to go to team coherence when a team is operating coherently. And I'm sure in athletics and other team sports, we can see a coherent team and see uh, elements that would cause us to think that they're coherent because a team is just made up of individuals.
Right.
And so is an organization. And so when we think about organizational design and organizational systems, any organization, doesn't matter what the industry, doesn't matter where it's located. Globally, we're still talking about human beings working together toward a common purpose. And if we can create systems and structures, yeah, that support coherence, we're going to create the conditions for performance.
And what would be an example, just an example of a system that you're referring to that would help create that coherence that's
Mm.
maybe a little different than kind of maybe our instinct to go 100% brain?
Yeah, well, may I use a metaphor? And
Please.
then,
We
yeah,
love
so I think
metaphors. Love them.
a great, yeah, I love metaphors. I think a great metaphor might be that of a symphony orchestra. All right. So in a symphony orchestra, you have individual players
Mhm.
and they have their instruments and they're responsible, right, for their instruments and for their performance. And they have talent and they have experience, they have education, they have skill. This is much like any other organization. And then you have the score. So the score is, the cadence of the orchestration. So it gives
Mhm.
us the tempo and it gives us the notes and so on and so forth. And then we have the orchestra conductor. And the orchestra conductor's responsibility is not to tell people what to do, right? The orchestra conductor is not going to pick up the violin and play that part. Or, the
Yeah.
orchestra conductor's job is to sense the entire composition and to direct the playing of the instruments such that it creates an experience of coherence. And you can play the same piece as an orchestra 20 times and you're going to get 20 different performances, right?
Yeah.
Just based on how people, their emotional state and all of those things. Now, it may, to an untrained ear, right, it may sound the same, but we know as leaders that the performance is an output of, what people create. And
Yeah.
sometimes you can create extraordinary results, exponential results without all of the resources that you need. I can cite a dozen different examples. The space race is one, what we were able to create to get a man on the moon. That
Right.
was an example of coherence. If you've
Hmm.
ever looked at, there's a beautiful documentary out about the creation of the SR-71, which was a high a reconnaissance plane that was built by Skunk Works. And they built that, they created new materials. It had never been done before, but
Hmm.
they created that plane in record time with profoundly limited resources. That's coherence.
Because of the
So,
coherence. Yeah.
yeah, what's needed is purpose, right?
Okay.
Is commitment to a purpose larger than oneself, right? And all of the things that we've been talking about. So, those
Right.
are elements of coherence in an organization.
We've
Yeah.
been kind of dancing, or we kind of like went into it, but a lot of this is tied to a big topic we want to talk to you about, which you call like the quantum science of leadership, and we're kind of getting into the neurological part of this. So,
Mhm.
you know, uh, you were careful to say that this is not woo woo, but practical when you talked to us earlier. And I think that we found that when you're talking about this can actually be measured, it's technology. So, for leaders who may hear quantum and immediately get skeptical, how would you frame what quantum science has to do with leadership?
Yeah. Well, I think
Or even explain what
skepticism
quantum science is when we talk about that and what you mean by quantum science as well for
is
some people.
funny. Yeah, because first of all, I think skepticism is healthy
Yeah.
and is very healthy. And, the scientific method is a methodology that draws on skepticism
It does.
to
Yep.
challenge assumptions. Right? And that is extremely healthy. What I'm saying is maybe we need to do more of that. Maybe
Okay.
we need to have a higher degree of skepticism about our existing models, because I'm not sure that we have challenged the assumptions that those models are based on as much as we should have. Now, quantum science, by all accounts, is the single most successful scientific theory that's ever existed. All of our current technology, and I can list a bunch of them, but all of our current technology, including MRIs, uh, uh, laser, computer chips, smartphones, all of that exists because of our understanding and application of quantum science. So we're using it, and now we've got quantum computing, and we have all of this extraordinary technology. And by the way, the medical technology that allows us to measure a state of coherence is based on quantum science. So this is not it's a theory, as all scientific theories are until proved otherwise. But this, as a working scientific theory, is the single most successful theory ever discovered, and we're using it.
Yeah.
Now, again, it doesn't dismiss Newtonian science. Newtonian science is still valid, and our best understanding of quantum science adds to that and expands it.
How are they different? Or
Well,
how does it add
okay,
on to what Newtonian is? If maybe that's a better way of thinking about it.
sure. Well, Newtonian science is the based on Isaac Newton, cause and effect, measurable, predictable. The apple drops from the tree. It has a certain weight, has a certain velocity. It can be measured. It is predictable, and there's a mathematical component to that. And it is breaking things down into parts. And so, if we understand the parts, now think about this in the medical uh, community. If we understand the parts, then we understand everything, right?
Yeah.
About that part. But in other words, if I'm a heart doctor, I can understand the heart. And man, I really understand it. But what Newtonian science doesn't provide for is the system and how that heart system connects to every other system in the body.
Yeah.
And that's what quantum science provides for, is not just the part, which is important. We need to understand that. But more importantly, today, we need to understand the connection between the parts, the relationship between the parts. That's the difference, and that's what I believe quantum
Yeah.
science provides for, is an expanded view that takes the part into consideration, but also expands it into the relationship between the parts,
Mm.
the energy between the parts, right? The actual relationship between people, the actual relationship between people and the systems, the actual relationship between people and purpose. Those are
Mm.
all components of what I believe the quantum paradigm makes available.
So if I'm one of those skeptics and I say, "Great, Anne, I get the theory. Quantum mechanics is about how the systems work together." How do you how do you tell me how to move that into the practical reality of how I lead?
Yeah.
What do you tell them? Like for that person that's just looking for the more concrete, here's what you do with this information.
Yeah. Well, there are people a lot smarter than I who have
Not us,
re-
not us. No.
well, uh,
Hey, speak for
I'm just
yourself, John.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Not me.
I'm trying to put these pieces together, but so first and foremost, um, I would like to provide your listeners with a list of some of the foremost thinkers who
Yeah.
are really exploring these questions. I would mention Donald Hoffman, who is a cognitive scientist at University of California, Irvine. I would mention Federico Fagin, I believe is how his last name is pronounced. He was he was the inventor. And you can look, this guy is interesting and he has a lot to say, but he was the inventor of the first commercial microprocessor and one of the pioneers of the digital age. And he is deep in exploration of these concepts. And I would also mention Robert Lanza, who is a leader in stem cell technology.
Mm.
Those are the scientists. Okay. The leadership development people who are exploring how to apply that science into organizations are also extraordinary. So, Robert Kegan, Kegean, is out of Harvard, and he has created, and he's not the first, but this is an application of what we're talking about. He has created a way to calibrate. I'm going to make a connection here, but I'll come back and explain it. He's created a way to calibrate levels of consciousness in leaders. Now, the connection I want to make is between quantum and consciousness.
Let's do it.
Yeah, go.
Wanna
Let's
hear
do
this.
this. Yeah, I'm like on the
That's
edge
a
of my seat. Yeah.
that's a big connection. I
Yeah.
know it's a big connection there. And that's why I wanted to give your listeners, some scientists who can explain their thinking. But the connection between consciousness and quantum is simply this. Many of our most brilliant scientists are beginning to see or explore the idea that consciousness is primary, that everything is based in consciousness. And the quantum field, as we best understand it, I make that really clear, as we best understand it, is a field of information. What scientists are now beginning to explore is not that human beings produce consciousness, but that consciousness exists, and that what our neurology is designed to do is to receive data and information. Now, the scientists that I mentioned and the academics who are working to apply this in organizational leadership are using that connection to create models. So Robert Keegan at Harvard. I would also mention Richard Barrett. Richard Barrett developed a model, and many of your listeners will be familiar with this because it starts with Maslow's hierarchy.
Okay.
And Richard Barrett said, Maslow's hierarchy is probably accurate and it reflects levels of consciousness. So if we're in a state of survival, our actions, our decisions, and our behavior are going to reflect survival, beliefs. Yeah.
Yep.
So survival is at the very bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. And until those needs, those motivational needs are met, we're going to be acting and making decisions out of a desire to survive, which is wildly different than making decisions and taking actions out of a state of purpose.
Yeah, it seems to me that one of the things that this is leading to is for leaders is how do we develop ourselves or even develop leaders? To your point about our consciousness of something comes from our awareness of it, right? So like awareness of the things already exist, but it doesn't become reality until we process it and understand it. So how do we get out of this like survival mode of leaders of myopically viewing one thing or this very specific thing, to your point about the orchestra, to how do we develop that into see the harmony of everything and how we create harmony that allows those things to play together? Does that seem like what
that's
the thinking is leading to?
Yeah, thank you. So it presupposes that a leader's most important commodity is their attention and energy.
Okay.
And where we place our attention, is where we place our energy. And that attention is participatory. It's participatory. So it doesn't just observe, it participates in creating the environment and the cultures that we live within.
Yeah. Let's go there. Josh, you
Yeah.
ask our question here about
Yeah.
energy flows,
Yeah.
where attention goes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, and you share this quote, but energy flows where attention goes.
Mhm.
What does that mean for the day-to-day reality of leading a team or an organization? Because I think the concept is so fascinating. It's all about presence is kind
Yeah.
of what I'm hearing from you. So what does it mean for leaders?
Well, I'd like to give you a demonstration.
Good. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to play a little game to practice.
Okay.
To practice this concept. So the concept is, where your attention goes, energy flows, and then results follow. Okay. So I'm going to give you both 5 seconds. And in 5 seconds, I want you to look around your room where you are, and I want you to count the number of things that you see that are red. On your mark, get set, go. Okay, stop. John,
Okay.
how many things did you see that were green?
I saw notes on my wall. The wall behind me is kind of a dark green,
Right.
but that's all I got.
How many things did you see that were purple?
I can't think of any.
No, because your attention was directed to red, right?
Yeah.
So where your attention goes, energy flows, and results follow. Now that's a fun little game, but you saw red because I directed your attention to red. But what you didn't see was purple. What you didn't see was green. What you didn't see was round. What you didn't see was square. Now let's think about how this works for leaders. Let's imagine that you have a team member who is messed up, who never delivers results. And if your attention as a leader is focused on that, guess what you're going to see? You're only going to see the mess ups. You're not going to see the effort. You're not going to see, in other words, you're not going to see the blue, the green, the round. You won't see anything other than where your attention is directed. And we do this all the time to our teams and to individuals in our teams, and the results show.
So how does a leader navigate that desire to look for, like, I could hear voices in my head of like, well, you're not seeing all the good stuff. How does a leader, how would you advise a leader navigating the tension between, I don't want to put my energy where the negativity lives or the failures or the challenges live, without also being naive or oblivious, quote unquote, or ignoring these quote real world problems?
Yeah. Well, right, because that's our job too as leaders, right? So it's a matter of just shifting our attention and shifting our focus. So I'm not saying ignore those real world problems, but it's the amount of attention that we want to give them. Because if we're only looking at risk, we're going to see risk, and then we're going to create teams that are risk, seekers. Not solution seekers, risk seekers, because that's where our attention is going. So I'd like to, again, just provide a metaphor. It's almost like if you were driving a car down a mountain road, you want to look ahead to where you're going, because you've got twists and turns and maybe an icy patch. You would look in the rearview mirror, right? It's not that you don't want to look at what's behind you, but if you focus your attention on what's behind you, you're going to crash. And the same is true for driving an organization, is that we have to look ahead at where we're going. What are the results that we want to create? What's the purpose? What's the mission? It goes back to those military lessons. What's the purpose, the mission? What are the results that we want to create, and be able to adjust despite the tension, despite the challenges that show up.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot on this show and about this concept, and Josh, you have an alternative one, but the self-differentiated leader. What's the alternate language you've used for that, Josh, before?
Yeah, mature, high functioning leader.
Where they stand outside of the system. So for your example about this person, this person has problems. And I have to stand outside of that and either ask, okay, let's take the big view of this person. And is that the only thing about this person, or can I adapt that thing with the other things, their strengths? Or even to see them in the context of the whole team, and say like, okay, what next needs to happen to make sure that this person doesn't impact the high functioning of the rest of it, or to make some shifts within it. Right. So I love that thinking, because I think it goes back to this idea of how do you as a leader get out of this sometimes and see everything and make principled decisions based on that. If you're thinking about this from like a leadership development, which I know is the work that you do, Anne, how do we apply this concept when we're developing new managers, new leaders? I mean, even veteran folks that need to make some shifts. How do you see us beginning to apply this, even if it's just like one simple way to get this off the ground for how we develop leaders? What would you recommend?
Do an attention audit. Pay attention to what you're paying attention to, right? I mean, that's a simple thing to do, is what are you thinking about?
Yep.
What are you talking about? What are you measuring? What are you rewarding? And what are you worried about? That's an attention audit. And if leaders who are listening to this really want to test their boundaries, after you discern the answer to those questions, flip it. And by flip it, I mean if you have, a preferred way of thinking about things or a preferred way of rewarding or preferred way, flip it and do the opposite. Like if you're looking for red in your team, red meaning crisis or risk or whatever, flip it and look for what's going well, what's going right, where are the wins? Flip it and just test your own boundaries with how you're paying attention.
Yeah.
That it's a fun little game. We play it all the time,
Yeah.
especially around topics that are very divisive at times. It's good to try and test.
I think that's like, even if you're in a leadership team meeting and you do a development activity there, you give people a scenario and you ask them to write down what their reaction to that is, to
Hmm.
ask them then to say, now flip it about how you would maybe think about this differently, or what's the opposite of what you're thinking and why is that a valid way of thinking also,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
Even if it's not real world, but then you begin to train the way they do this as well. So I
Yeah.
love that thinking. Yeah.
And I would reinforce it by saying, as a leader, your attention
Mhm.
is participatory. It's not just observing, you're participating in what you observe. And it's critically important that you, as a leader, manage your state of being, meaning your energy, your emotional state, because that's creating conditions in your organization as well. And you cannot fake it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That reminds me of your article on lingering to a certain degree, which I know is
Mm,
like in a different context, but I think sometimes we think that just the ability to pay attention, to your point, it's participatory. Is that what you said, right? It's
mhm,
participatory. That's like a conscious decision to pay attention to things. Just like lingering is a conscious decision to take a moment to not get busy or caught up in all the other
mm,
things that can occupy your time.
mm.
Um, so I really love that connection too, based on some of your writings too.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no, and that's really good stuff. And I think just to, for my own self and looking for a takeaway of many, and for the listeners here, I want to go back to the part that you emphasize between Newtonian and quantum science is that
Mhm,
quantum science is based on system, and systems change starts with you. And this idea that if you are doing this work, if you are working on your awareness, your consciousness, your presence, that it's not just about the part, you as the part within the system or within the organization, but your literal change in how you are putting energy where it belongs is going to be a catalyst in changing that system. And I think that for me, one of the biggest takeaways, not just from our conversation today, but when I think about developing leaders, is some of the old models of leadership development have been so focused on what are you doing with everyone else? How are you trying to change these other parts? And at the end of the day, the biggest change I believe that you can make for your organization is to change yourself, because your
mhm,
presence is going to be the quantum science ripple effect, so to speak, across the organization.
mhm.
And like you just said, you can't fake it. You can't
Yeah,
fake it. You can tell everyone else what to do, but everyone knows that you're not doing the thing that you need them to do. So, anyways,
really
that's just
well
that
said.
it's coming
Is
up
like
for me here.
Yeah.
beautifully said. Is like instead of developing others, develop yourself, and that can make the biggest difference.
Yeah, love it. Well, and thinking about motivations and influences, you've shared several today, but we always like to
Mhm,
leave our listeners with a question of
okay.
who is a leader? Maybe not the most
Mhm,
important one in your life, but who is a leader, dead, alive, family, friend,
mm,
unknown to you, who inspires you and why?
yeah. Thank you. A lot of them, but I'm going to mention Everett Alvarez Jr. Um, Mr. Alvarez was best known as the first American shot down over Vietnam and the longest held POW in our history.
Hmm.
And he was held 8.5 years at the Hanoi Hilton. And I had the great privilege of working for Mr. Alvarez for many years after I returned to the United States. So he inspired me because when he, with his comrades there, were POWs, they created an intention. And the intention that they created was return with honor. So they that was their only intention. They didn't intend. They never talked about whether we would. Well, I don't know if they ever talked about it, but they didn't um, focus on returning alive or
Yeah.
returning altogether. They really just focused on that one intention to return with honor, and they did. So that really taught me about the power of purpose, of higher purpose, of intention, and of working together with a team toward a common purpose. Most powerful thing in the world.
I mean, talk about the quantum side of leadership. Like, how are we thinking beyond just like survival and thinking about
Yeah,
how we do this with honor? I think that's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Great.
And we really have loved our time with you. Thank you for bringing this perspective and I think a new topic for us to dive into further, and even for us just within the show to see the connection to many of the things that have popped up in our show with other guests. It's been really enlightening. Any
Mm.
final things you'd love to leave our guests with? Anything else that you just want to food for thought for us to take as we head into these summer months?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, John, and thank you, Josh, for inviting me, and thank you for conceiving, I think, one of the most important topics on the planet for leadership right now, which is, we're in the space in between what's next,
Yeah.
right? And actually raising the question to challenge the assumptions. So thank you both for doing that. And I would just, um, I guess what I would leave your listeners with is, look, there's a whole new world out there. There are some extraordinary thinkers who are doing extraordinary work. And science takes time, but the work is available. And so I would continue to explore, and some of the leaders that I mentioned, as well as many others. I'll give you a worksheet of
Perfect.
links to books and different
Wonderful.
resources that your listeners might be interested in pursuing.
Wonderful. Well, we want to thank Anne McGhee-Stinson for joining us again. In the show notes, we'll provide all information and writings that Anne has produced, but also, as Anne mentioned, she's been kind enough that she'll share a lot of resources for you to further dive into it. As Josh mentioned at the top, we'll be taking a break for a few weeks, playing some old episodes. But come back for more. Come back for a place where you can do this sort of learning and this sort of thinking with us, and send your thoughts over this next month so we can apply them to the next season. So until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.